morning and welcome to Sunday School for January 16th. My name is Brandon Keaton and I'm the Director of Music Ministries here at First Methodist of Albany. And today we're going to begin a new unit that we're entitling Wonder. Not like I wonder who wrote the Book of Love, but the wonder and the awe of being in the presence of God. And so we're going to be looking at a few passages from what might seem like very different parts of the Bible over the course of the next few Sundays, where we will look at what being in the presence of God does to people. So the first one that we're going to look at for today is going to be from Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 8. And this is a very well-known story, the story of the Transfiguration of Jesus. And so we're all familiar with that story. At least I think we are. In fact, it hasn't been that long ago that we were looking at the story from the Gospel of Luke. Well, Mark has a slightly different take on the Transfiguration story, and I really always like what Mark has to say. And so we're going to dive right in. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. The story of the Transfiguration does not happen in a vacuum, and there are lots of things that happen on either side of it. One of the things that happens just prior to the Transfiguration is Jesus asking his disciples, "Who do you say that I am? Who do you think I am?" And of course, they say that the crowds are talking, say that he might be Elijah, he might be one of the prophets, he might even be John the Baptist, risen from the dead. But Jesus says, "Well, who do you think I am?" And they tell him, of course, Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah." And of course, Jesus is pleased by that until Peter says that he doesn't want him to suffer any persecution as a result of declaring himself Messiah. And so, of course, that causes a problem between the two of them, but not for very long, because clearly Jesus is taking Peter and his other compatriots, James and John, up on a mountain not very long after having had this what is a transitional story in the Gospels. Everything from the time that they confess Jesus as Messiah on really is pointing to Jesus' death on the cross, and then of course to his resurrection. Well, so even in translation, of course we're reading this in English and it was originally written in Greek, the story of Jesus' transfiguration brings about a strong sense of the numinous, otherworldliness. And so Mark has taken pains to reinforce that sense by placing this story between Jesus' soliloquy, or his self-talk about taking up one's cross, which is what immediately precedes this, right after the confession of Peter. It's sandwiched between that and then the story of the disciples were trying to heal a boy who was mute, and they could not do it. And Jesus has to rebuke the disciples, and then rebuke the demon and send him out of this child. And they didn't have enough faith, basically, to do it. So this otherworldly story is then is sandwiched in between these two. Well, so we don't really know where the mountain was. There are lots of stories about mountains that it could have been. Some say it was Mount Tabor or Tabor in Galilee. Some say it was much further north, Mount Hermon. We don't really know where the mountain is, and really for the story, it doesn't matter. What matters is the height of the mountain rather than the location. That it is a high place that they have gone up to get away from everything. And so I don't know about you, but I like to go places and see different things, and sometimes some of the most breathtaking things that we ever see are mountains, or we spend some time in the mountains, or maybe even it's by the ocean. When we see the vastness of creation, and we just get the sense that God is there with us. Well, Jesus does this with his disciples. He takes them up onto a high mountain, and he's transfigured or transformed in front of them. And it's like an Old Testament prophetic vision. The prophets would receive visions many times on mountains. We know that Moses did, and Elijah did, and Samuel did, and David did as well. So we know that many came to mountains seeking for the Lord, seeking something from him. Well, Jesus appears with Moses and with Elijah. And of course, this is a sign to the disciples and to us that Jesus is going to be dealing with some things that have to do with the end of time. Not just his end of time on earth, but the end of time. And all because when Moses and Elijah appear, especially during this time, the time of Jesus, it was believed that they would usher in the end of the age. Well, in this literary context, the image is reinforced and deepened by three other aspects of the text. We know that it starts out and it says, after 6 days, and this must be after the 6 days after Peter's confession. It says that there is the 6 days, and that does give us a look back to Exodus 24, which describes Moses' ascent on Mount Sinai, where he waited 6 days before receiving the tablets of stone containing the law and the commandments. So when Moses is getting ready to receive the 10 commandments, he goes up onto the mountain and he waits there for 6 days. But even if that is not what they are alluding to, it is still significant. What Mark is trying to get at, sometimes the narrative can seem random, but it always, in the end, after looking at it, it seems to really mean something specifically. You see that there's a cloud. Well, there's a cloud around the mountain when Moses went up Mount Sinai. It forms the final connecting link to that story of Moses. The allusions to the Sinai story are reinforced by other references to a wide range of Old Testament and even some intertestamental text describing divine appearances. So, like for instance, we are going to next week look at Moses' face that is glowing white in Exodus 34. So we're going to leave that for now. But in Daniel chapter 7, the Ancient of Days is described as having dazzlingly white garments. And so we see some similarities there. And so, and then also, this is an odd thing for you, but in the apocryphal book of 2 Maccabees, chapter 2, it promises that the glory of the Lord will reappear, and the cloud also, as it did in the days of Moses. So at the time of Jesus, people were expecting something like this to happen. Moses and Elijah to return, the cloud. It's all telling the same story that God has been telling all along. And the third thing that this alludes to is the context in which we are to understand the appearance of Moses and Elijah. Here and just after this, they ask about the coming of Moses and Elijah. His disciples do, and he says, of course, that Elijah will come first and restore all things. He says that later in this chapter 9, verses 12 and 13. But the way he says it is like, well, everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. And so I really think that everyone was expecting something to happen with Elijah. Now, what that might be, we don't know. But, Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, chapter 3 and chapter 4, talk about Elijah coming to prepare the way for the Lord. But what the disciples do not understand is that Elijah has already appeared in the form of John the Baptist. The reader already knows this because there have been allusions made to it way back in chapter 1, and of course Jesus is going to make it plain in chapter 9, verse 12. Well, moving on, although Mark's audience may not have caught the complexity of these allusions as they listened to the reading of this gospel for the first time, they would undoubtedly have perceived that on the mountaintop was a manifestation of God's glory. And I think for us, that is the biggest point that we want to take, is that God's glory is being manifested here. And how do we know this? We hear a voice. The cloud comes and covers the people that are on the mountain. They see this vision, and then they hear this voice. And of course, what does the voice say? It's almost identical to what is said at Jesus' baptism. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Or who is my greatest delight. What I think is important for us is the next part. He doesn't just stop there by identifying who Jesus is. He says and gives a direct command, listen to him. So, the disciples in the Gospel of Mark just seem to know absolutely nothing. They are oblivious to everything. And so what we find here is that Mark is showing the disciples that all you have to do is listen to Jesus and you'll be okay. You don't have to understand everything that's going on. Just listen to him. Listen to him. One of the things that happens to us, though, oftentimes is that we, like Peter, don't know what to do when God calls or when he talks to us. It's like we don't recognize it, or we're not attentive to it. And so it's up to us then to try to find ways to get ourselves to the mountaintop. It doesn't have to be a literal mountaintop. It can be a figurative one, of course. But it's important for us to find the time to be quiet and alone with God. So that way he has the opportunity to speak, and we have the opportunity to follow that command and listen to him. Peter and the other disciples are very afraid when they see Jesus like this and they see Moses and Elijah. And what does it say? It says, it's great that we're here. Why don't we build a tabernacle, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah? Basically, this is so great, let's just stay here forever. But the truth of the matter is we cannot stay on the mountaintop the entire time. We want to have those experiences where our spirit is refreshed in God and refined by him. But we also need to bring that refreshment, that refinement down from the mountain so that others can be a part of it as well. We are the ones who bring Jesus to the world. And so for us, we just can't stay there. We have to listen to him. And what's interesting is that the form of the Greek in the words that are translated as listen to him are present tense, and they can be translated as keep listening to him. Does the voice from the cloud offer the solution to the disciples' ignorance? Is that solution offered to us today? My answer to that is yes. Whatever was bothering the disciples, whatever was holding them back from understanding everything, the voice from God said, listen to him, and answered all of their questions. That in turn answers all of our questions. Be patient, wait on the Lord, and listen to him. Thanks be to God for this indescribable gift. Amen.